Hi, my name is Beatty, and Dr. Treadway has asked me to talk to you a little bit about my experience with grant writing and kind of share with you some of the lessons I've learned, some of them the hard way. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit and kind of go through a few things with you. So let me first of all start by my experience with grant writing. So probably about my third year of teaching, I decided to write a grant. I was pretty excited, put a lot of work into it. Thought I had a good chance of getting that grant, and then I got that rejection letter in the mail. It said I had not been funded, and that was really hard, and I kind of just put it to the side and said, well, maybe grant writing just isn't for me. And I really didn't think about it for a while, for several years. And then later on, I decided there were some things that we really needed in my third grade level with my third grade teachers that I taught with, and we didn't have the money to do it. The principal didn't have the money, so I decided to write a grant to try to get us some of the materials that we needed. And so I gave it another shot, and this time I was funded. And so this time, instead of getting a rejection letter, I got a letter that said congratulations. That's a really great feeling when that happens. So one of the lessons I learned from the rejection was that when I went back and looked at that original grant, the first one that I did not get, my language was not concise, it was not clear, and I had not followed the grant application just a little bit. And at first I thought it kind of was doing what it asked, but in reflection on it, I really hadn't. And that's what had gotten me thrown out on the first one. So lesson learned, and so since I've got that first one, it's been really addictive. It's almost like Christmas when you open that letter and it says congratulations, because then you get to start spending money. And so it's a great feeling. In the last 4 years alone, I've written 9 grants and been funded for all of them for roughly around $20,000, which isn't a huge amount of money, but enough of money to buy a lot of neat stuff to help students in their learning. And so that's been really, really exciting for me. And it's really addictive. Once you get one, you're going to want to do another one, another one, and another one. And I kind of tend to focus on smaller grants in the $2,000 to $5,000 range. That's just kind of where I'm comfortable writing at this point. So I've gotten a number of those grants in kind of that category. One of the things I want you to kind of be aware of and to think about is that after you decided which grant you're going to go for, and talking to Dr. Treadway that most of you have figured that out, before you actually start writing that grant application, I encourage you to do some research. So for example, if you're going to do a technology grant, then do some research to find out why technology is important in education. Do some research and cite that evidence in your proposal. You want to get some language, some lingo that's important for whatever topic you're doing. So if you're going to do something for arts and education, then you need to be finding some research about that. If you're going to go to write a grant to go to a field trip, why and how will that impact student learning? Do some research on that and incorporate that kind of wording into your grant proposal. I'll give you an example of that. My last grant that I received was through the EPA, and it was a sustainability grant. And so once I decided I was going to go for that grant, I spent quite a bit of time researching sustainability and sustainability education and why it was important for students to learn that. Got on the EPA website, and they had a teacher tab with lesson plans and a whole curriculum. I used a lot of that language in my proposal for the EPA grant. They recognized that language, and it made my application a lot stronger. So do some research, incorporate that research, cite that research, just like we do with our papers and our artifacts. You'll want to do that in your grant proposal as well. It shows that you have knowledge and understanding of that topic and how it can impact student learning. Once the grant, I'm going to kind of talk to you now about if you get your grant, and hopefully you will. Hopefully you'll get that congratulations letter. Once you receive that grant, there's some things that you need to know and be prepared for. Number one is the money. I'd like for you to talk to you about the money. Each school district will have a policy on how grants are handled. For my district, I need to talk to my principal before I write that grant and make sure she's okay with that proposal. Is she going to support it? Because if she's not, then I don't need to try to write that grant. So I always talk to my principal before I write the grants. If I'm awarded the grant money, you always want to have the check made out to the school district, not to you personally. There's several reasons for that. You want to be very transparent on how you're spending that money. So going through the district offers you that transparency. So you're going to have to fill, most things are get paid for with a purchase order a lot of times, or you'll have to get a permission to purchase without a purchase order, which is going to require a number of signatures before you just get that money. My first grant, my first large grant for the school garden, I was a little disillusioned about how the money would work. I thought the money, I could just kind of spend it the way I wanted to. I kept a few receipts, the receipts on how I spent it, and that would be enough. And in my district, it is not enough. That check went to the school district. It got put in the activity accounts, and I had to get 4 signatures before I spent any of that money. And again, that was for my protection and for the school's protection. And now looking back on it, I'm glad that I have that. And so, just be aware of how your district is going to handle it. Different districts may have different policies, so you want to check and make sure you get clarification of that. The central office also always wants a copy of the grant. They want to see the budget, and that's another oversight to make sure you're spending the money the way it's outlined in the budget that you submitted in your grant. So I always give a grant application or grant proposal to the central office accounting department as well. Different grants will require different requirements to issue the money. Like a lot of times grants will require what's called a tax identification number. The people in your central office accounting department will have that form if you need it. Lots of times you'll have to get verification of employment, a principal letter on school letterhead, just as verifying that you do indeed teach at that school that you've applied for that grant through. So there's always paperwork and documentation that you need to do just to prove that you're spending that money in an ethical way, the way you've outlined in your budget. Always follow the action steps that you've outlined in the proposal. It's really almost like a contract. When you send in that application and they send you that money back, I'd like for you to think about that almost like the same as a contract. And so if you said you're going to do XYZ, then you really need to do XYZ. And if you're not able to spend the money that in the way that you propose, then you really owe it to that organization or that company to get permission to change something. I'll give you an example of that. So I wrote a grant to get a field trip paid for through Target. And Target, I was funded for that, and they were going to go to the Museum Discovery 3rd grade. And it would cover their cost for the entrance, and it would cover even part of the cost for the fuel for the bus. So they were going to go to the Museum Discovery, wrote it, was funded. We found out a couple of weeks before it was time to go on the field trip that the Museum Discovery was going through massive renovations. A lot of their exhibits were offline, and our teachers were really kind of concerned that maybe it wouldn't be a quality field trip with that much going on in the museum. So they wanted to know if they could change it from the Museum Discovery to the zoo. Well, to get that permission, I really shouldn't make that decision myself. I really should call Target, call the department I worked through to get the grant and really get permission. So I did that. And they were very understanding and supportive, but they said, we will not give you permission to make that change. You have 2 basic options. You can either continue to go to the Museum Discovery, spend the money the way you identified that you would, or you'll need to return the money. And so it wasn't an ideal situation, and I didn't get approval to change that order at that time, but I still owed it to the Target corporation to spend the money the way that they suggested that I did and the way that I outlined in my proposal. So we went to Museum Discovery, and it wasn't the best field trip, but it was the right thing to do. So always get permission to change major things before you just say, oh, it doesn't matter, I'll just do this and they'll never know. You really owe it to them to do it the way that you've outlined. Also, when you get the grant and you start putting it into practice, always be thinking about documentation. Some grants will require you to send documentation back, some will not. You know, it just depends on the grant. But regardless, you always want to collect documentation, even if you're not going to have to send it back to them. That protects you if they ever have questions later on, or if the district has questions on how you spent the money. So you always want to take photographs. You always want to collect evidence of student learning and how that grant, once it was applied and put into practice, how it impacted student learning. You always want evidence. Protect yourself again. You also may want to use it if you decide to do later on National Board certification. You might could use that in your National Board process. And also just to show your professional accomplishments. So always be willing to collect that evidence, photographs, get it in the paper if you can. That's great documentation that you've actually carried through. I recently, my last big grant was through the EPA. And with that grant, there were a lot of action steps, and it's going to be a lot of work. And I'm currently putting the action steps into practice and getting that going. The next week, part of that accountability is that I have to have a conference call with the EPA office out of Louisiana who issued the grant and okayed it and funded it. And I had to give them an update where I am via teleconference. And that's the first time I've had to do that. So just know that each grant, different paths to proving how you're spending that money, and you just always want to be ready to do that. I guess my challenge for you is to always look for opportunities to write grants. I know that's a requirement for this class, but when you get in the classroom, there are always going to be things you want. And as a teacher, especially with science, there's so many science materials that I'll never be able to buy with my regular science budget that's issued to me each year. But I want the very best for my students. I want them to have the most experiences that they can. And so it's worth my time to write some grants to get them those extra things that they need and that I want them to have to enrich their educational experience. Lots of teachers will not write grants. A lot of teachers, I think, are nervous. They don't think they can do it well enough. Be brave. That was our advice from Dr. Treadway. I encourage you to be brave, try grants. Once you're out of this class, once you get in the classroom, be willing to try it. It's very, very rewarding. Today, we were using some materials I purchased with a recent grant through the TAG grant, which is through our junior auxiliary in Russellville. And today was the first time I got to use those materials I purchased. It was construction sets. So my grant was about engineering practices in elementary, thinking about the STEM push with science. And so today they got to use those construction sets, the rock and block construction sets we got with that grant. I would have never been able to buy those in my science budget. But to see them for the first time, to take those construction sets and start building bridges, I gave them a design problem. They had to construct a bridge. Just to hear the learning and the discussion and the planning together, the collaboration between those students was amazing. And I just thought, my students would never have had the opportunity if I hadn't taken the time to write that grant to get those construction sets. So I challenge you to look for those opportunities. There are always grants out there. It's just a matter of looking, doing the legwork, writing them, and then putting it into practice. And I promise you, try it, you'll get some. I get a lot of my grant activities from this publication called NSTA Reports. And in their newspaper each time they have In Your Pocket, and they have all kinds of grants that they have available. This comes out once a month, so I look at it every month. Every type of educational publication, a lot of them anyway, will have a grant section to help spread the word about what grants are available. So look for those things, look for opportunities, search on the internet. There's so much opportunity out there. And just know that once you get the first one, you'll be addicted and you'll want to do some more. So if I can help you in any way, please send me a question. I'll be glad to help. And I hope this was useful and beneficial to you. Thank you. Have a good day.